the millionaire who paid my mom's medical bills anonymously. It was my high school bully. The envelope that changed everything. I was standing in the hospital billing office, staring at a number that might as well have been written in a foreign language. $847,392.67. That's what 3 years of cancer treatment, experimental trials, surgeries, and hospice care cost when your insurance decides that certain procedures are not medically necessary. My mother had fought stage 4 ovarian cancer like a warrior. She'd endured chemotherapy that left her weak and radiation that burned her skin. She'd smiled through the pain and told me everything would be okay even when we both knew it wouldn't be. She passed away on a Tuesday morning in March, holding my hand, telling me she was proud of the person I'd become. And now, 3 weeks after her funeral, I was drowning in medical debt that would follow me for the rest of my life. "We can set up a payment plan," the billing administrator said, her voice practiced and sympathetic. "Maybe $5,000 a month for the next 15 years. $5,000 a month. I made $38,000 a year as a social worker. I lived in a studio apartment and ate ramen 4 nights a week. $5,000 a month was impossible. "I need some time," I managed to say, my voice cracking. She handed me paperwork. I walked out of that office in a daze, sat in my car, and cried until I couldn't breathe. 2 days later, I received a call from the same billing office. The administrator's voice was different this time, shocked, almost breathless. "Ms. Rodriguez," she said, "I'm calling because your mother's account has been paid in full." I stopped breathing. "What?" "Someone made an anonymous payment. Wire transfer. The entire balance. You don't owe anything." "That's not possible. Who would?" "The payment came through a private attorney. The donor requested complete anonymity. All we know is the funds cleared and your debt is zeroed out." I spent the next week trying to figure out who had done this. I had no wealthy relatives. My mother's friends were teachers and nurses, good people but not millionaires. I called the attorney's office a dozen times. They wouldn't tell me anything. Then, 6 months later, I found out the truth in the most unexpected way possible. And it destroyed everything I thought I knew about forgiveness, redemption, and the person I'd hated most in my life. The boy who made high school hell. His name was Brandon Mitchell, and from sophomore year until graduation, he made my life a nightmare. It started small. Comments about my thrift store clothes, jokes about my scholarship status while he drove a BMW his parents bought him for his 16th birthday. Whispers loud enough for me to hear about how I didn't belong at Westwood Academy, where tuition cost more than my mother made in a year. My mom had worked double shifts as a nurse to send me there. She believed in education, believed that the right school would open doors for me. She sacrificed everything, vacations, new clothes for herself, any kind of luxury, so I could have opportunities she never had. Brandon Mitchell represented everything I resented about that school. Wealthy, entitled, cruel in the casual way that rich kids can be when they've never faced real consequences. He had a crew of equally privileged friends who treated bullying like a sport. Junior year, he started a rumor that I'd cheated on the SATs. It wasn't true, but it spread fast enough that I had to meet with the principal and retake the test to prove my score was legitimate. The humiliation was crushing. Senior year was worse. He accidentally spilled an entire cafeteria tray on me during lunch, ruining the dress I'd saved 3 months to buy for the winter formal. His apology was loud and theatrical, designed to draw maximum attention to my ruined outfit and my tears. "Sorry about your dress," he'd said, smirking. "Maybe shop somewhere that has more than one of each item next time." His friends had laughed. The whole cafeteria had watched. I'd run to the bathroom and hidden until the bell rang. At graduation, Brandon gave a speech as class president about perseverance and making the world better. I'd sat in my chair, fuming, thinking about how people like him never really faced consequences. He'd go to an Ivy League school, Yale, I'd heard, paid for by his trust fund. He'd get some executive position at his father's company. He'd live his privileged life and never think twice about the people he'd hurt. I promised myself, I'd never think about Brandon Mitchell again after graduation. That promise lasted 12 years, until the day I found out he'd saved my life, building a life from scratch. I went to state college on a combination of scholarships, loans, and work-study programs. Graduated with a degree in social work because I wanted to help people who'd been overlooked, dismissed, or stepped on by systems that didn't care about them. My first job was at a nonprofit serving homeless youth. The pay was terrible, but the work mattered. I helped teenagers who'd aged out of foster care find housing, connected pregnant teens with prenatal care, fought with bureaucrats who saw these kids as statistics instead of human beings. Mom was so proud. She'd come to my tiny office, bring me lunch, and tell everyone about her daughter who was changing the world. She never mentioned how hard she was working to make ends meet, never complained that I couldn't help much financially because my student loans ate half my paycheck. When she was diagnosed with cancer at 53, the bottom dropped out of both our worlds. Ovarian cancer, stage 4, already metastasized to her lymph nodes by the time they found it. The oncologist gave her statistics that sounded like a death sentence, 5-year survival rate of less than 30%. But Mom wasn't a statistic. She fought. Through chemo that made her violently ill, through surgeries that left her weak and scarred, through radiation that burned her skin and stole her energy. I moved back home to take care of her. Worked my job during the day, came home to change dressings, manage medications, hold her hair while she vomited, and pretend I wasn't terrified of losing the only family I had. Insurance covered some of it, not enough, never enough. There were co-pays and deductibles and out-of-network charges, experimental treatments that insurance called elective, medications that cost thousands per month. I maxed out credit cards, took out personal loans, started a fundraiser online that raised $11,000, touching, but a drop in the bucket compared to what we needed. Mom lasted 3 years. 3 years of fighting and hopping and believing that maybe, somehow, we'd beat the odds. We didn't. She died on March 17th, 2 weeks after her 56th birthday, leaving behind a mountain of medical debt and a daughter who was too angry at the universe to properly grieve. I inherited her courage, her compassion, and $847,392.67 in bills I could never pay. The mystery donor. For 6 months, I tried to figure out who had paid my mother's medical bills. The attorney's office wouldn't budge. Client confidentiality, they repeated every time I called. The hospital billing department couldn't, or wouldn't, tell me anything beyond confirming that, yes, the debt was completely cleared. I made lists of possibilities. Maybe a wealthy patient my mother had cared for during her nursing career. She'd been kind to everyone, often went above and beyond. But I reached out to families I could remember, and they all expressed sympathy but knew nothing about the payment. Maybe a nonprofit organization, some charity that helped families with medical debt. I researched dozens of them. None had programs that covered amounts that large, and none had record of my mother's case. Maybe an anonymous philanthropist who helped random people. It seemed far-fetched, but stranger things had happened. I posted in online forums, asked if anyone had heard of similar situations. A few people shared stories of smaller bills being paid, a few thousand here, 10,000 there, but nothing close to almost $1 million. The mystery consumed me. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning trying to solve it. Who had that kind of money? Who would give it away without wanting recognition? Who even knew about my mother's situation? My friends told me to let it go. "You got a miracle," my best friend Carmen said. "Don't question it, just be grateful and move on." But I couldn't move on. Someone had fundamentally changed my life, erased a debt that would have defined my existence for decades, and I didn't even know who to thank. I started thinking about it differently. Maybe figuring out who wasn't as important as figuring out why. What motivated someone to give away that much money anonymously? Was it guilt, obligation, pure altruism? I decided that whoever it was, they'd done something extraordinary. And even if I never found out their identity, I could honor their gift by living differently, by being the kind of person who helped others without needing credit, by paying forward the grace I'd been given. I volunteered more, donated what little I could to medical debt relief organizations, started advocating for healthcare reform, tried to channel my gratitude into action. And then, 6 months after the payment, I saw Brandon Mitchell at a coffee shop, and everything changed. The coffee shop encounter. I almost didn't recognize him. 12 years changes people. He'd lost the arrogant swagger, the perfectly styled hair, the designer clothes meant to broadcast wealth. He wore jeans and a plain sweater, sitting alone in the corner of a neighborhood coffee shop, working on a laptop. But it was him, Brandon Mitchell, the face that had haunted my high school nightmares. My first instinct was to leave. I didn't want to relive that part of my life. Didn't want to risk him saying something cruel or dismissive. Didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing he still had any effect on me. But something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was unfinished business. Maybe it was the grief counselor's voice in my head telling me that avoiding things doesn't heal them. I walked up to his table. He didn't notice at first, focused on his screen. "Brandon Mitchell," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. He looked up, and I watched his face go through several emotions in rapid succession. Confusion, recognition, surprise, and then something that looked like pain. "Alina," he said quietly. "Alina Rodriguez. You remember?" "Of course I remember." He closed his laptop. "Please sit, unless you'd rather." "I don't know what I'd rather," I said honestly, but I sat anyway. We stared at each other for a long moment. He looked tired, older than 30 should look. There were shadows under his eyes and a tension in his jaw that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. "I heard about your mother," he said finally. "I'm so sorry for your loss." The words hit me harder than I expected. "How did you hear?" He hesitated. "I saw the obituary. I've been keeping track of you, not in a creepy way," he added quickly. "Just checking in occasionally, making sure you were okay." "Why would you do that?" I demanded. "You made my life miserable in high school. Why would you care if I was okay?" He looked down at his hands. "Because I've spent the last 12 years trying to make up for the person I was, and failing. Every single day, failing." Something in his voice made me pause. This wasn't the Brandon Mitchell I remembered. This was someone else entirely. "What happened to you?" I asked. "Everything," he said. "Absolutely everything." The confession. Brandon ordered us both coffee. I didn't refuse. Something about this moment felt important, like a door opening that I hadn't known was there. "After graduation," he began, his voice low, "I went to Yale like everyone expected, had every advantage. Money, connections, a guaranteed position at my father's investment firm after graduation. I should have been set for life." He paused, staring into his coffee. "But I was miserable, completely, utterly miserable. I'd built my entire identity on being better than other people. Richer, smarter, more successful. Except at Yale, everyone was rich and smart. I wasn't special anymore. I was just another entitled kid from money." "My heart breaks for you," I said, unable to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. He smiled sadly. "I deserve that, but hear me out. Junior year, I developed a substance problem. Started with prescription medication to help me focus, then spiraled into something worse. By senior year, I'd blown through most of my trust fund on my habit. My parents found out, cut me off, gave me an ultimatum, rehab or nothing." I stayed silent, watching him. "I chose rehab. 90 days in a facility where nobody cared about my last name or my father's money, where I had to sit in group therapy and actually deal with why I'd become the person I was." He looked up at me. "Do you know what I realized?" "What?" "That I'd been a monster. That I'd hurt people, really hurt them, because it made me feel powerful. That I'd targeted you specifically because you had something I didn't, authenticity, purpose. A mother who actually loved you instead of just funding your existence." His voice cracked on that last part. After rehab, I didn't go back to my father's company. I couldn't. I started over, got a job at a nonprofit, learned what actual work felt like, started making amends to people I'd hurt. He pulled out his phone, showed me a list. I've been working through this for 10 years. You were on it, but I could never figure out how to approach you. What to say that wouldn't sound hollow? I stared at the list. My name was there, along with dozens of others. What does this have to do with anything? I asked. Everything, he said. Elena, I need to tell you something I should have told you months ago. The truth revealed. I paid your mother's medical bills, Brandon said. The words came out in a rush, like he'd been holding them in for too long. All of them, the whole debt, it was me. The coffee shop sounds faded away. All I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. What? I whispered. I found out about your mother's illness 2 years ago. I was volunteering at a medical debt relief organization, part of my amends work, and I saw a case file with her name. Elena Rodriguez's mother, cancer patient, overwhelming debt. I knew it had to be you. He looked at me with something like desperation. I couldn't just process the case through normal channels. The organization's fund could have helped with maybe 10 or 15,000. Not enough. Not nearly enough. So I paid it myself, all of it, anonymously through an attorney because I knew you'd never accept help from me. I couldn't speak, couldn't think. My mind was racing through too many emotions at once: shock, disbelief, anger, gratitude, confusion. You had no right, I finally managed. No right to do that without telling me, without giving me a choice. I know, he said quietly, but if I told you, you would have refused. You would have drowned in that debt rather than accept help from someone who hurt you. And I couldn't live with that. Couldn't live with knowing I could help and chose not to because it would make you uncomfortable. So you made the choice for me, I said, my voice rising. Just like you made choices for me in high school, deciding I didn't belong, deciding to humiliate me. You don't get to play hero now to make yourself feel better about being a terrible person then. People in the coffee shop were starting to stare. Brandon's face was pale. You're right, he said. You're absolutely right. I don't get to play hero. That's not what this is. This isn't about me feeling better. This is about the fact that you deserved help and I had the means to give it. That's all. That's all, I laughed bitterly. You paid almost $1 million of my debt and that's all. Yes, he said simply, because it was the right thing to do and because I loved her. The world stopped. What did you say? The story he never told. Not like that, Brandon said quickly, seeing my expression. Not romantic, just, your mother was the first person who ever saw me as human. He stood up, agitated, running his hands through his hair. It was spring of senior year. I was already spiraling, already using substances to cope with the pressure from my parents. I got into a car accident, minor, but I was impaired. Your mother was the ER nurse on duty that night. I sat back down slowly, unable to process what I was hearing. She could have reported me, Brandon continued. Should have reported me. I was clearly under the influence, clearly a danger to myself and others. But instead, she talked to me, really talked to me, asked me what was going on. Why a kid with everything going for him was destroying himself. His voice got thick with emotion. I told her things I'd never told anyone, about the pressure, the expectations, the feeling that I was suffocating under the weight of being who my parents wanted me to be. And you know what she did. I shook my head, unable to speak. She told me about you, about her daughter who'd endured bullying and discrimination and still came out kind, who chose to help people instead of accumulating wealth, who'd made her prouder than any amount of money or success ever could. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. She said, My Elena knows that character isn't about what you have. It's about what you do with what you have. I hope someday you'll learn that too. A sob caught in my throat. She didn't lecture me, didn't report me, didn't judge me. She just saw me, saw through all the privilege and cruelty to the scared kid underneath. And she gave me grace I didn't deserve. Brandon wiped his eyes. She made me promise to get help, to be better, to stop hurting people the way I'd been hurting myself. And then she said, If you ever become the man I think you can be, do something good with it. Help someone who needs it. Make the world a little less cruel." He looked at me. "I've spent 12 years trying to keep that promise. Paying your mother's medical bills wasn't charity, Alina. It was a debt, one I could never fully repay." I was crying now, couldn't stop, couldn't breathe. Because suddenly, everything made sense. Healing and forgiveness. We sat in that coffee shop for 3 more hours. Brandon told me everything about his journey through recovery, his work with nonprofits, his life living modestly on what he earned instead of his family's money. He showed me the other names on his list, people he'd found and made amends to in various ways. Some had forgiven him, some hadn't. He accepted both outcomes. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said as we finally prepared to leave. "I'm not telling you this to make you absolve me. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the truth. And because your mother saved my life that night. Everything good I've done since then, I owe to her." I looked at this man who'd once been my tormentor and saw someone completely different. Someone who'd been broken and rebuilt himself. Someone who'd taken grace he didn't deserve and tried to pass it forward. "I don't forgive you," I said finally. "Not yet, not for high school, but I understand you better, and I'm grateful for what you did for my mom, for what you're trying to do now." He nodded. "That's more than fair. But I need time to process this, to figure out what it means." "Take all the time you need," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." We exchanged numbers, not as friends exactly, not yet, but as two people connected by tragedy, grace, and the memory of a woman who'd seen the best in both of us even when we couldn't see it in ourselves. Over the next year, Brandon and I built something unexpected. Not friendship exactly, but a kind of understanding. We volunteered together at the Medical Debt Relief Organization, worked on advocacy campaigns together, honored my mother's memory by trying to make the healthcare system less cruel. He never tried to absolve himself, never asked me to forget what he'd done. He just kept showing up, kept doing the work, kept trying to be the person my mother had believed he could become. And slowly, impossibly, I started to heal. Not just from losing my mother, but from the wounds I'd carried since high school. Because I learned that people can change. That grace, when given freely, can transform lives. That sometimes the people who hurt us most become the people who help us most. My mother had known that. She'd seen it in a broken teenage boy in an ER at 2 a.m. And her act of compassion had rippled forward in ways she'd never lived to see. The morality of second chances. 3 years have passed since that coffee shop conversation. Brandon and I aren't just colleagues now, we're friends. Real friends. The kind who can talk about the past honestly without it defining the present. He still works at the nonprofit, having risen to director of development. He's helped clear millions of dollars in medical debt for families across the country. He speaks at schools about bullying, recovery, and second chances. He lives in a modest apartment and drives a 10-year-old car. He's dating someone kind, a teacher, ironically, who knows his full history and loves him anyway. I finished my master's degree in social work, got promoted to program director at my organization. I advocated successfully for policy changes that expanded healthcare coverage for low-income families. I carry my mother's memory with me every day, trying to see people the way she did, not for who they are at their worst, but for who they might become. The question people always ask when I tell this story is, how did you forgive him? The truth is more complicated than forgiveness. It's about understanding that people are capable of profound change when given grace instead of judgment. It's about recognizing that hurt people, but healed people can heal people. Brandon was a bully because he was drowning. That doesn't excuse what he did, doesn't erase the pain he caused, but understanding the why helps release the hold that anger has on your life. My mother taught me that. She saw a cruel, entitled teenager at his lowest point and chose compassion over condemnation. She planted a seed that took years to grow, but eventually blossomed into something beautiful. That's the real moral of this story. Grace is not weakness. Second chances are not naive. And sometimes, the person you hate the most is the person who needs love the most. Brandon saved my life by paying that medical debt, but my mother saved his life by showing him compassion when he deserved judgment. Both acts of salvation came from the same place, a belief that people are worth fighting for, even when they don't fight for themselves. Especially then. I carry that lesson with me now, when I'm working with difficult clients, when I'm faced with people who have made terrible choices, when I'm tempted to write someone off as irredeemable. I think about a 17-year-old boy crying in an ER, a nurse who chose grace, and the ripple effects of that single moment of compassion that are still spreading outward, touching lives, changing hearts, making the world a little less cruel. One act of grace at a time. The moral lessons. People can change. Dismissing someone forever because of their past behavior denies them the opportunity for growth and redemption. Grace is transformative. Small acts of compassion, like a nurse talking to a troubled teen, can create ripples that change multiple lives across years. Forgiveness is complex. True healing isn't about forgetting harm, but understanding its origins while choosing not to let it define your future. Anonymous giving has power. Brandon's decision to pay the debt anonymously wasn't about getting credit. It was about doing the right thing regardless of recognition. Second chances must be earned. Brandon didn't just apologize. He fundamentally changed his life, his values, and his actions over more than a decade. Hurt people hurt people. Understanding that cruelty often stems from pain doesn't excuse it, but it helps break cycles of harm. Character is revealed in action. Brandon's years of consistent, genuine service proved his transformation more than words ever could. Generational impact of kindness. Alina's mother never knew the full extent of how her compassion would ripple forward, but it changed countless lives through Brandon's subsequent work. Healing is not linear. Alina didn't forgive immediately, and that's okay. Real healing takes time and doesn't follow a script. Legacy lives in how we treat others. Maria Rodriguez's true legacy wasn't measured in possessions or accolades, but in the lives she touched with compassion, including someone who would go on to help thousands of others in her memory.